Okay, hi, my name is Sasha, and I'm interviewing my mother, who is...
Kate Swift-Scanlan.
Yes. Okay, so I have a couple questions for you. Well, they're not a couple, but there's quite a few. But first, you're going to start out with, your childhood experience. So that's the topic it's under.
Okay.
So my first question is, how was life different as a child than it is for children today?
Well, there was no cell phone, there was no internet.
Okay.
TV was black and white for the longest time.
Mm-hmm.
And we seemed to have a lot more freedom in the rural areas, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Violence wasn't such an issue as it is in today's schools or neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't a concern,
Okay.
I should say. And those were probably the most significant differences.
Mm-hmm.
Communication, entertainment.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Can you give examples of the prices you paid for items? Just compare them to today's prices, I guess.
The main price difference that I recall was gasoline, of course. It was about 50 cents a gallon, which is
a lot
quite
better
different from today. And I'm imagining that prices are quite different. Although I don't recall a lot of them from childhood, I do remember my first year in college, my mother sending me a $10 bill every week in the mail.
Imagine.
And that was pretty... I lived for that $10 bill, but that was really all I needed at the time. So that's pretty different.
Now you're paying like 10 grand. Anyway.
Well, $10 was for my spending.
Right.
It was just my spending money.
What is the earliest event or person of historical significance that you can remember? Like hearing about or learning about?
I think that probably was Kennedy's assassination. I remember that, walking in the school hall, and I heard that news.
Our next topic is education. Okay, so was everyone in your family able to attend school? To what levels, and why or why not?
Everyone in my family? Well, my mother only graduated from high school, and she took other coursework to learn steno, and I think that was probably she probably took a lot of courses in her administrative field, but she didn't go to college.
Okay.
And my father went to college, but didn't graduate. He went for 3 years, I think. Didn't graduate. And my brother did graduate from college, and my sister never went to college.
Okay.
And I have a graduate degree.
Bravo. How are schools different then than they are now?
Schools were still pretty segregated in those days. So that's the huge difference. And I remember my 6th grade teacher was an African American, and this was would have been 11. He was not allowed to swim in our lake. So civil rights. civil rights played a huge part
Mm-hmm.
in my generation.
Yeah, I can imagine. Okay, now on to historical events. Thank you. Do you remember any of the wars that were happening when you were growing up, or just in your lifetime?
So as I was growing up, I was pretty insulated.
Mm-hmm.
I really didn't know anything very much at all about the outside world.
Mm-hmm.
So my first experience with a major war in terms of awareness was the Vietnam War.
Okay.
And that was very much part of my generation. And I went to, in the early 80s, I went to work in a refugee camp in Thailand.
Uh-huh.
So that really further sparked my interest in the Vietnam War and the history of those countries involved.
Were you impacted by racial segregation in any way?
Only in that I never met any African American kids.
Uh-huh.
There was no one in my community, no one in my school except my teachers. I had several teachers, 3 or 4 African American teachers. But as I said, my 6th grade teacher wasn't allowed to swim where we were swimming.
Right.
I remember my African American teachers as being very good teachers.
Mm-hmm.
But we had no black students in the school in Connecticut.
Right. Okay. Do you remember where you were, what you were doing, and your reaction to the critical news of Kennedy's assassination?
I was in the 8th grade, and I was walking down the hallway, and I think one of the students in passing mentioned it, called it out to me or something like that. It's what I recall.
Mm-hmm.
And I was, it was a big deal,
Mm-hmm.
of course.
Right.
It was on television, black and white.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really all I remember, is that we watched a lot of TV. I don't know how much we really talked about it in classrooms.
Right.
I don't think we did.
Mm-hmm.
But in my family didn't talk about politics at all very much.
Mm-hmm.
Or if they did, I don't remember. I don't remember being really aware of that.
Okay. Thank you. The next category is like gender roles, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So, how has the role of women in the home, workplace, and community changed in your lifetime?
Well, there certainly are more women in the workforce now
Mm-hmm.
than there were in the 50s
Mm-hmm.
and the 60s. But there are probably just as many women responsible for child care and housekeeping as
Mm-hmm.
there were back then.
Right.
I don't know that that's changed a great deal, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
And feminism, of course, was not even a word in those days.
Mm-hmm.
Gender was never a word used by anyone.
Mm-hmm.
So those issues really, at least in my family
Uh-huh.
and neighborhood, I think had I lived in New York City and lived in the village or lived in some progressive pockets,
Uh-huh.
there certainly were other families and other communities
Mm-hmm.
that where awareness of those issues were first and foremost. But in my protected little Connecticut home, they were never talked about. Mom was responsible. She had a full-time job, but she was still responsible for keeping the house clean and feeding everyone.
Mm-hmm.
taking care of the kids.
Right. Okay, thank you. Based on your gender, what did your family and society expect you to do? Or did they expect anything of you because of your gender?
Well, they had expectations about me going on to school. They always had expectations about me succeeding in life.
Mm-hmm.
And but I was expected to be very feminine,
Mm-hmm.
to dress with feminine, to the feminine ideal, and
Mm-hmm.
hair and makeup and all the clothes. And I mean, I didn't have a lot of clothes as a teenager,
Mm-hmm.
but my expectations were that I would marry and have kids.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
But I was expected to go on to college and do something. I was a nursing major, so that fit well with everybody's plans.
Okay, thank you. Our next is society and economy. In your lifetime, what has been society's greatest challenge?
In my lifetime, what has been society's greatest challenge? In my lifetime? Well, certainly the present, climate change,
Okay.
is society's greatest challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And and racial discrimination
Mm-hmm.
still exists.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly having a very close to totalitarian president is a social issue
Right.
that's critical,
Mm-hmm.
needs to be addressed critically.
Mm-hmm.
And probably the gender issues
Mm-hmm.
in terms of LGBTQ rights and the so those are the income inequality. That's another big one that's extremely important.
Mm-hmm.
Has worsened over the years.
I agree.
So I think that's enough.
A lot of challenges we have to overcome.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, my next question is, what kind of work or jobs did you do in your lifetime?
Well, I worked as a cashier in a drugstore.
Wow.
I worked in a laundromat. I worked in a nightclub.
Mm-hmm.
I worked...
As what?
Well, as a waitress.
Oh, okay.
A waitress.
Okay. Just checking.
And I worked as a nursing assistant. And then I worked as a psychiatric social work case aide.
Uh-huh.
And I worked as... most of my jobs following that were related to nursing.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What observations can you make about the channeling American standard of living in economic health?
Repeat that again, please.
What observations can you make about the changing American standard of living in economic health? I can't read my own handwriting.
The changing economic health. Well, there's more income disparity than ever before.
Mm-hmm.
There are more people in poverty.
Right.
Wages have been stagnant for a number of years. Corporations are benefiting more for their shareholders than the workers. Unions have decreased significantly.
Mm-hmm.
and therefore workers' rights have decreased, which
Right.
has contributed to the wage issue. And technology has had some impact, but more than technology, I think it's the growth and the power of corporations.
Mm-hmm.
Was that the answer that you were looking for?
I think so,
Something
yeah.
like that, okay.
Something like that. Next is politics and government.
Mm-hmm.
Easy does it. Who is your favorite president and why?
Oh, my favorite president. Oh, goodness.
Or who do you think benefited this country, I guess?
Well, my favorite president was probably Obama.
Okay.
It would have to be Obama.
Okay. Thank you for your response.
Yeah. And why?
Yes, why?
He was an eloquent speaker. He had integrity.
Mm-hmm.
He was a thoughtful man.
Mm-hmm.
He is a thoughtful man.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't always agree with his decisions, but
Right.
I still think he is a thoughtful man and
Okay.
has the needs of the American people and foremost
Okay.
as a motivating factor.
Okay. In your lifetime, which political issues were most important to you?
In my lifetime,
Mm-hmm.
political issues. Healthcare,
Okay.
healthcare systems,
Mm-hmm.
and administrative decision making.
Mm-hmm.
So the politics of healthcare is huge. It's been a big part of my life, my world.
Right. Since you work in healthcare.
Because I work in healthcare.
Next is pop culture.
Pop culture?
Not pulp culture. How has recreation or what people do for fun changed?
Recreation.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed to me that it was much simpler back then, many decades ago.
Uh-huh.
We went to drive-in movies. We went to bowling alleys. We played baseball outside.
Yeah.
We swam in the rivers and
See,
the
I
creeks.
would enjoy that.
We ice skated in the frozen swamps. We watched TV for fun.
Mm-hmm.
That was a huge entertainment because it was new.
Right.
We didn't spend going out to eat once a month was a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
At least in my family it was.
Mm-hmm.
And so entertainment now, I think there's a lot more money spent on entertainment now. Certainly the internet again
Mm-hmm.
has taken a big slice of that into their ilk. And young people have a lot more money to spend, I think.
Yeah,
on entertainment.
definitely.
And entertainment is everywhere. It's television commercials and for some people and theater tickets for others, but entertainment is... There always was theater and there always was entertainment, but we seem to have access to it a lot more readily now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. How have clothing styles changed over the years?
Clothing styles. Well, for me or for society?
I guess society.
For
'Cause
society.
it doesn't say for you, so.
Well, there is clothing styles. We always cared about clothes in elementary school, middle school, high school. what you wore to school mattered. You wore your nice clothes to school. You got
saying to wear nice clothes.
Shopping for school clothes was a big deal then.
Mm-hmm.
It was a big event.
Right.
So I'd say clothing has become a lot more casual.
Yes.
A lot more casual.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot to be said for that.
Right.
There's not such an emphasis on it, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, the gender roles do still get in the way. In some situations, women are still expected to wear heels and stockings and skirts.
Right.
So, in some ways, they haven't changed, depending on who you're working for and what the image is that you want to project.
All right.
Clothing is still about projecting a certain image of yourself.
That's true.
That hasn't changed.
Right. How has music changed over the years? What styles and artists were or are your favorite?
Well, of course, I grew up in the 50s, so there was great music, American Bandstand.
Mm-hmm.
That was wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
And then into the 60s and 70s, which was the time of Woodstock and rock and roll and the Beatles and all the incredible music that came out of that era.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of creativity, a lot more creativity, I think. Now it seems difficult for artists to find something new and different in a way to relate to the crowds. I think it's become much more commercialized.
Oh, yeah.
And therefore a lot more homogenous
Yeah.
than it used to be.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like definitely same 3 chords over and over again. But, yes.
I think Broadway music is still just as popular, if not
Oh,
more.
yeah. I
Even
applaud.
as a child, that was popular for our family.
What television shows, movies, and theater productions stand out the most in your memory, and why?
Movies and theater productions and TV shows. Certainly, as I said, American Bandstand, Alfred Hitchcock, The Twilight Zone. Those were all in black and white too. The Father Knows Best. All of those all those family shows. The Donna Reed show. Those were quite popular and a lot of fun to watch. Things were lighter.
Lighter, yeah.
Much lighter. The focus was more on levity, comedy, and statements about the general culture, I think. The cultural norms at the time. So that was TV. And as for theater, well, I remember falling to sleep listening to Oliver, and that was the first Broadway show that I ever saw. And I think I was 13 at the time. And The King and I, Camelot, those were popular back then too. And movies were mostly movies that my father wanted to see. The Pink Panther.
It's a good movie.
Or the earlier Clint Eastwood movies, I guess.
Yeah, sounds like crap.
Goldfinger. James Bond. At the drive-in.
Oh, yeah. Hardcore.
Right. We didn't go to indoor theaters that much at all.
I wish we could go to drive-ins.
Yeah, drive-ins were a lot of fun.
I wish they have them somewhere. I bet they have them.
They do have a few around the country. I don't know where they are.
I don't either.
They were cheap.
Yeah.
And they were a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But my father was so strict he wouldn't let us go down to the playground. They had a little playground down under the big screen so the kids could play before the movie came on.
Mm-hmm.
But Dad didn't want his kids to go down and play at the playground, so we were never allowed to do that, and I always remember missing that.
Mm-hmm.
But Dad and Mom would pack up hot dogs for Dad and put them in a little cooler to keep hot, and we rarely bought things in the concession stand because it was too expensive.
Yeah.
We usually brought our own food.
Mm-hmm.
But again, that was one of the advantages.
Exactly. Okay, and now we're on to our reflection. Okay. If you could live your life over, what would you do differently?
Oh, what would I do differently? So many things I would do differently.
Mm-hmm.
I would not, what I would do differently? Of course, there's some things I can't tell you in person. I can't tell you about that I would do differently. But I think I would have tried to complete my education earlier in life.
Okay. That's a good one.
And that's a good one.
Maybe not go to 3 college.
Right. Tried to get through the first one. Although the other experiences were good experiences in the long run.
Mm-hmm. It's true.
But I would have finished earlier. That's the one big thing I probably would have done.
Okay. And what advice would you give to a future generation? Or future generations, I should say. I don't know why I worded it that way.
Stand up for yourselves. Speak the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Pay attention to what's happening in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And who's making it happen.
Mm-hmm.
Try to make change wherever you can.
Right.
To improve the general lot.
Mm-hmm.
Complete your education. Never stop learning. Keep your health.
As we say now in a pandemic.
Because you'll need it.
Right.
Climate change will be in your lap.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for that.
Anything else?
No, that was it. All done.
Okay.
Thanks, Madre.
Yeah, you're welcome. That was fun.
Yes.